My parents screamed at me so loudly in my own living room, I'm sure my new neighbors thought someone was being robbed. "How could you buy a four-bedroom house without telling us?" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "Do you have any idea what you just ruined?" I stood there holding the key to the first home I'd ever bought with my own money, completely stunned. I thought they'd be proud. Instead, they looked at me like I'd committed a crime. It wasn't until my father let it slip a few minutes later that I understood why. They'd already promised my new house to my older sister, her freeloading husband, and their 3 kids, without ever asking me. I'm Nora Whitfield. I'm 34, and for 6 years my entire life revolved around one goal: owning a place that was truly mine. Late shifts, no vacations, every spare dollar saved. When I finally closed on a beautiful 4-bedroom house, big backyard, cozy fireplace, room enough to breathe, I was floating. I invited my parents over for a simple dinner, planning to surprise them with the reveal. I pictured my mother tearing up with pride, my father's tight hug. Instead, my mother's eyes darted around the entry hall and her face darkened. "Nora," she snapped, cold enough to freeze the room, "whose house is this?" I held up the key, proud. "Mine, Mom. I bought it." My father's face went red. My mother erupted. "How could you buy this without telling us? Do you know what you've ruined?" "Ruined? I've been saving for 6 years. Why are you screaming at me?" "Because your sister is being evicted, Nora. That's why." My sister Claire and her husband Reed had been struggling for years, mostly because Reed hadn't held a job longer than 2 months, and Claire expected everyone else to fund their life. 3 kids, a mountain of debt, 0 savings. "Their lease ends next month," my father said, his tone shifting into cold entitlement. "We've been planning this for 3 months, a place big enough for Claire, Reed, and the kids to move in with you. And now you've bought this deed strictly in your own name." I stared at them, shock curdling into something sharper. "You planned for 5 people to move into my home without asking me?" "They're family," my mother snapped. "What else were you going to do with 4 bedrooms? Live in luxury while your sister's children end up on the street?" "Reed hasn't held a steady job in 3 years," I said. "Claire won't cut back her spending. Every time someone helps them, they take advantage. I am not turning my first home into a rent-free shelter for a grown man who refuses to work." My father's glare turned dangerous. "So that's it? You'll let your own nieces and nephews suffer for your pride? We're disappointed in you, Nora. You're being selfish." For the next 48 hours, my phone became a war zone. Claire's texts got more hostile by the hour. "How could you do this to my kids? You have 4 bedrooms sitting empty while my children are about to be homeless. You're a monster, Nora." Reed left a passive-aggressive voicemail. Disappointed I was letting my ego come between family. I didn't reply to a single message. Engaging would only feed the fire. Then came the flying monkeys. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly full of opinions. My aunt called me at work to lecture me about the sanctity of family. That's when my cousin Priya told me the part that made my blood run cold. My parents hadn't just hoped Claire would move in, they'd promised her the house was practically hers. "Your mom told everyone at Sunday dinner last month you were buying a big place specifically for Claire's family," Priya said. "Your mom said you were single, didn't need the space, and it was your duty as a daughter to house them." They'd traded away my future, my independence, 6 years of my sweat without ever telling me, treating my savings account like a shared family bank account. 3 days later was my grandmother's 85th birthday at a local restaurant. I almost stayed home to avoid the drama, but I loved my grandma too much to let them ruin her day. I walked in composed, determined to keep the peace, and stayed close to Grandma the whole afternoon. As dessert was served, my father tapped his glass. "Before we wrap up, we need to address something breaking our family apart." Every eye in the room turned to me. "As many of you know," he continued, arm around a tearful Claire, "Claire's family is facing an impossible housing crisis. Meanwhile, Nora here just bought a massive 4-bedroom house, all for herself." My mother stepped forward, face a mask of fake grief. "We asked Nora to open her heart to her own flesh and blood. She refused. She'd rather let her nieces and nephews suffer on the street than share her blessing." Gasps around the table. Claire sobbed into a napkin. Reed shook his head in bitter disappointment. They'd backed me into a corner in front of 20 relatives, expecting me to crumble under public shame. I stood up slowly. The silence was suffocating. I didn't break. "Since you've made my personal finances public entertainment," I said, my voice steady, cutting clean across the restaurant, "let's talk about the actual truth." I turned straight to Claire and Reed. "Over the last 4 years, I've given you over $12,000. Rent, utilities, groceries for the kids. Where did that money go, Reed? Toward finding a steady job, or toward video games and takeout?" Reed flushed red, mouth opening. I didn't. Then my grandmother slammed her teacup down onto its saucer with a sharp crack. She turned her fierce glare on my parents and Claire. "That is enough," Grandma snapped, voice trembling with fury. "Nora worked her fingers to the bone for that house. How dare you try to humiliate her at my birthday to cover up your own failure to raise responsible adults? Claire, Reed, grow up." Humiliated and exposed, my parents, Claire, and Reed gathered their things and fled the restaurant in silence, unable to face the room they just tried to turn against me. That was the moment the real payback began. Not loud, not dramatic, just consequences, finally landing where they belonged. In the weeks that followed, I put my parents and Claire on strict low contact. Blocked, muted, no answered calls that opened with demands or guilt. The silence was the best gift I'd ever received. Without my savings as an endless safety net, Claire and Reed were finally forced to face reality. Reed took a full-time job at a warehouse, the longest he'd worked anywhere in years. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment they could actually afford on their own. Turns out they were completely capable of taking care of themselves the moment nobody was left to enable them. My parents tried reaching out months later, testing the waters with a birthday card, a stiff "we should talk." I didn't rush back. I let them sit exactly as long as they'd let me stand alone at that dinner table, holding a key they tried to make me feel guilty for earning. As for me, I spent my evenings painting the walls of my 4-bedroom house. Soft furniture, warm lighting, plants in every window. Walking through my quiet, peaceful home after a long day gives me a kind of pride no family guilt trip could ever touch. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Blood might make you related, respect is what makes you family. And the people who tried to take my home without asking learned that lesson the hardest way I could teach it, by watching me walk away and watching their free ride disappear right along with me.